The average car costs 40 grand. The industry measures that sale by whether you clicked a banner. My guest today has the actual sales data. Every manufacturer, every day, 1 to 3 day lag. Deterministic. He ran a campaign optimized for cars sold instead of clicks. Cost per sale dropped by 2/3. Same results. 1/3 of the money. So the question isn't whether it works, it's what the other 2/3 have been buying all this time. Carl Matter, Urban Science. This is the Adotat Show.
Welcome to the Adotat Show. My guest today is Carl Matter, Director of Ad Tech Performance at Urban Science. Carl has spent 10 years inside the most data-rich consultancy in automotive advertising. Urban Science knows what cars sold where every single day. Carl says auto industry is measuring advertising upside down. Billions in spend optimized for clips and impressions when the actual sales happen at the dealership. Carl, welcome. First question of the day is, how are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here. I'm a big podcast fan, and this is my first, I'd say, official one. Thanks for having me.
So explain to me why the biggest purchase that any person makes is still measured by website clicks.
That is a great question. I think the answer comes in multiple parts, but technology is a big part of that. Auto sits in this interesting sort of inflection point of a vertical in that, as you point out, there's billions of dollars spent in advertising, but it's not something that even in 2026, at least today at scale, that you can put in your cart, click purchase, like Amazon, like we do with everything else. You have to physically go to a dealership to buy a new car, right? So that creates this dichotomy of online data and offline data. And historically, it has been very difficult to bridge that gap. You have many barriers that go in with that, which is speed. How fast can you get the data? Digital online exposures, that's a world that moves very fast, right? Billions and billions of impressions that are being served while we're talking right now. It's massive. Trying to bring that offline data online has been very hard. Because of that, advertisers have fallen back on the technology to the best of their ability that they had at their fingertips has been pixel based. I know that a lot of people shop online, and I can track all of these different things on my website, or I can track my paid search, which is a directional indicator of demand. There are all these things that were proxy measures because those gaps couldn't be bridged, and it became such commonplace that I think it still persists today in large accounts. But the great thing is,
do you think it's a technology problem, a willingness problem? Because Urban Science has the data. You've made that very clear. The data exists. Why does the industry not use it?
Yeah. So I think historically it was a technology problem. I think you're right in that a big part of it is it's a willingness problem today. So it's somewhat even awareness that the technology does exist, that we don't have to live in that world anymore. There is some of that. But another part is that change is hard. And even those who are aware, there's a whole system built around sort of that old model. And it's hard to unwind some of those things. And I think big part of it is that it goes back to what the marketers are ultimately held accountable for. So if you trace it back to, at the end of the day, whether it's an agency or a marketing team, they're all held to a contract with a parent client, right? Those are largely written around performance metrics. When I worked on the agency side, ours was, I believe, cost per action, right? So there were a certain number of digital actions, and what we were judged on every year was what rate did we deliver those actions at, right? So by nature, our media buying strategy and planning strategy was around how do we put together buys and how do we spend money so that we deliver those metrics, right? So, and a lot of those contracts are not updated as frequently as you would think, not necessarily written by people who have the expertise that you would think. So it's when those exist, even when you have folks who are aware and understand the impact of it, they still have to navigate those types of benchmarks.
So I looked through your case studies this morning, and they are quite remarkable. The Toyota HL Nexon optimizing for offline CPA cut costs per sale for 2/3 to traditional online KPIs. 2/3, that's not optimization. That would be revelation. Can you walk me through what happened? What changed when they stopped optimizing for clicks and started seeming pretty obvious paying attention to sales?
Sure.
Yeah, when I went through all this stuff this morning, I was absolutely floored how little had changed in the last 20 years. I have to be that absolutely honest. When I read all the stuff, I was like, I assumed in the last 20 years they had stopped being focused on the dealership.
If last touch attribution worked, your waiter would get full credit for the meal. We make sure the chef gets credit too. Incremental.
And who just walks in?
You're not alone in that take. I often think of a quote from Inherit the Wind, which I read in middle school, which there's two attorneys sort of fencing back and forth. And one of them has a quote of, motion is relative. Perhaps it is you who have moved further away by standing still, right? The industry, to a large part, has stood still while a lot of the technology has advanced. So that gap is more pronounced. In that specific example, it was pretty poignant. So it stands to reason that the systems and the technology is great, but the technology is going to do what you tell it to do, right? So what we do, I think what marketers do well for the most part is whether it's whatever platforms they're using. And I've heard some other folks speak about this on your show too, which I agree with, that the programmatic, works well in theory, but it's the execution where it can break down. So I think there is, in that particular instance, it's not that they weren't using the tools at their disposal, but they were using the system to optimize towards some of those proxy metrics like clicks, right? So when you're doing that, you're training the system to find more and more, whether it's, IDs or consumer proxies that represent those behaviors, right? Because I want to drive more of those. But you're getting farther and farther away from what the true outcome is. So when we tested it with them, we flipped it and we put in the sort of industry sales outcomes as the driver to say, okay, let's train the system on something else so that it's looking for more behaviors that are tied to this true outcome. And, somewhat not surprisingly, when you train the system on the right outcome, it delivers pretty strong results because that's what the system does. Yeah, it's 2/3 is not a small number, particularly when you, and it really doesn't matter how you slice it. So when you have what we would consider automotive tier 3 clients like that, they are scrutinizing their margins very closely because they don't have a lot to spare. And similarly, when you go up the funnel and you're talking tier 1.
Can you explain the tier? So what is the tier 1 versus tier 2 versus tier 3 in advertising? And why do the numbers look so different across tiers?
Yeah, good question. Automotive marketing is generally spent across what we consider tiers, right? So tier 1 is a reference to national advertising. So you have a brand that is buying.
And those usually aren't dealerships.
Yeah, it's usually not dealerships. It's national messaging. So it's something about Ford holistically or Honda holistically. You pick your brand. Tier 2, which is more regional, is something kind of around dealer groups or like around where I'm from. Your Metro Detroit Ford dealers. I get ads like that. Around that's more regional. But then tier 3 tends to be ads specifically for come see Carl Matter Ford for this great incentive that's running. You break down the budget, there's just as much money spent at tier 3 as there is at tier 1. It's just bifurcated across all the different dealers. So there are all these different pots. So
do the national advertisers, do they provide tracking from the national advertising all the way down to the funnel?
Typically they do not.
Dealerships?
That is a question that they have a lot of interest in, and we're working with a lot of clients to help them solve.
There's not a single major brand that that does. Is that what you're saying?
Not top to bottom that shares through. There's a lot of what we do in our solutions.
And I believe that. And I believe it because I've noticed when I go to their brand websites, nobody contacts me. I can sit there and go through the whole thing. And at some point, they should have asked me if I was that interested to build something, to find the inside, to build a color. They should have popped up. Somebody said, this is your nearest dealer. Send us your phone number and information. We'll talk to you about it. And they didn't.
Yeah, so there's a lot of business rules behind the scenes that are built around who gets to contact you when, based on what you're doing on what website. And they certainly will be aggressive about contacting you if they can.
Well, yeah, my local Toyota dealer is very aggressive about contacting me. You show up once to their dealer, they never leave you alone.
So in one of my earlier agency stops, I worked on website analytics, and we did an experiment to see, okay, we had like many brands, we had one of our key actions was request a quote, right? Which means in theory, if you fill out that activity on the website and say, I want to know about how much X car costs, you're supposed to get contacted with a response to that question. And so I did it. I had people on my team do it. And I think on average, it took us probably 19 different interactions with customers. Like, they were very aggressive about talking to us, but in terms of getting an answer to that question, like, we were requesting a quote, but we couldn't actually get a quote. So it is a little bit clunky about who owns what. Like, how often are we talking to the same person with tier 3 advertising as we are with tier 1 advertising? There's a lot of really impactful questions across the funnel that are difficult to answer. But yeah, like, going back to that case study, I mean, it shows that theoretically you can spend 2/3 less and get the same sales outcomes if you drive it to sales, which to me is an opportunity, because some agencies would look at that and be afraid, because they don't want to say, oh, you gave me $100. The last thing I want to do is go back to you and tell you I achieved what you asked me to with 33, and then you're only giving me 33. Well, I want to see, well, okay, if you can do that with that budget, what can you do if I give you more? And give them the opportunity to say, all right, this is the savings I saw by training the system correctly. What are all the other cool things I can do?
So your crazy opinion is that brands spend billions on media and strategy set at the CMO level, but the actual execution is done by the least experienced layer in the system. The most important decisions about how money is spent are handled by the most junior people. That's not just a crazy opinion. That's a structural indictment of how agencies work. Can you walk me through how this happens?
Yeah, it's interesting. And that's a perspective I got once I was working on the outside of the agency model, which I think there are many.
But I want to make this clear. This is not just automotive. I've heard this complaint from CPG, finance, pharma. I've heard it over and over again, the same exact thing.
Absolutely. You're looking at industries are generally profit drivers for holding companies, which is not a mystery. They're great at that. And it's, looking at the outside. So you spend all this time working with clients, right? And CMOs who are setting these billion-dollar strategies, as you point out. And then you look at how agencies are staffed, and traditionally the entry-level jobs start with ad trafficking and buying, which means the first thing you learn when you walk out of college and you step into an agency is how to place an ad, how to tag an ad, right? And there's a lot, and that's a complicated process. There's a lot of things that can go wrong with that.
Right.
And and what I think it takes a long time for those individuals to learn, even, myself included, looking back on my career, is to ask the question, why? And I think that gets lost along the way. There's so much distillation from when the CMO says, hey, these are our business goals. This is what we want to achieve, to following that winding road to how that gets applied. It funnels down to that training. We train people up to get up to raising those questions. But then when the decision to hit the button comes, it's people who probably weren't in advertising 2 weeks ago.
Jordan Finger, who was a guest
dichotomy
of mine last week, and also been a friend of mine for about 30 years. He's done about $1 billion in DR. He said the agency model is broken because junior talent, no accountability, and zero skin in outcome. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we're great at building systems, and people love to, I think, templatize things, right? And it's, okay, this is how it works. I played this role in this system and I need to do this thing. And that's where the why question comes in. You don't understand how it's connected or what the implication is upstream or downstream. And I think, unfortunately, the other element there is there's not a lot of talent development within agency. You don't find a lot of people who have been in the same agency for 10 years or 6 years. So there are exceptions, of course, but for the most part, it's kind of like, I always equate it to dog years and human years, right? Like, you're exposed to so much. It's a tremendous learning experience. And 1 year in agency world is kind of like 3 years somewhere else. But by the time you get that experience, you go somewhere else to apply it, and then you move around, and then a lot of people will come back to an agency they started at, but you lose some of that continuity and that expertise, which is challenging, top to bottom.
So outcome-based measurement for automotive, instead of measuring clicks, you obviously measure verified vehicle sales. Could you walk me through how sales match works? An ad runs, a consumer sees it. Weeks later, they buy with Toyota in a dealership. How do you connect the ad to the sale?
Yeah, great question. So going back to the bridge between offline and online that we described, one of the barriers that prevents that is speed. Well, at Urban Science, we're very fortunate to have very deep relationships with the manufacturers, and we have what we affectionately refer to as our data hub. Right. Which is a large repository of sales that is updated every day with new records.
From the OEMs.
From the OEMs, yeah.
Wow. And from the dealer and the ad platform too?
It gets to the ad platform through our process. It is that the sale record is collected by the individual dealers. The dealers share it with their parent OEMs. The OEMs batch it and send it to us. And we have a tremendous product team that has built a very robust and dynamic identity graph that allows us to take that offline data and translate it into many different anonymized permissible forms that allow us to connect it to the different platforms that the advertisers are using. So the Trade Desks of the world, the Amazons, the Yahoos, Googles, etc.
It sounds enormously complex.
It is. It's and that's kind of going back to why isn't it largely adopted? It's hard, right? A lot of people haven't done it, but that's where we step in and we can help.
Is it deterministic or probabilistic?
It is deterministic, which is nice for us because because of that sort of general flow I was describing, we don't have to model for geographies or for brands. We have 100% participation. So when we set up those connections and we use that graph, we create an ID to ID match within each platform. So in the H&L example, that one was within Nexon, I believe. We were able to send our data into that platform and map to specific Nexon exposures, which is how that was able to be tracked. And we do that across.
What's the look back window on those about?
Well, that is dependent on each platform. They all have different regulations for how far. Some have 30-day windows, some have 90. For us, our lag is anywhere from 1 to 3 days. So it's
But don't people
fast.
make decisions over months?
Yeah, right now, people who work with us are able to make decisions on the daily if they so choose. It kind of depends.
Well, I
where
meant
they fall
car
in those
purchasers,
tiers.
they make the decisions over.
Sorry,
Car purchasers.
car purchasers. Yes, yeah. So there are
The actual
people.
customer.
Yeah, the customers are buying throughout the period. So there's 56,000 sales, some odd, in the U.S. per day, and so those
Wow.
are funneling through. And so then
Didn't
from
know
a
that
media
much.
perspective, yeah, there's 15 to 16 million. It used to be a little bit higher. It's a little bit lower now in the US in total. But that means only 5% roughly of the US population is buying in any given year. But we're able to send the data. So as an advertiser is running exposures, doesn't necessarily matter when a person purchases, we will catch them and ultimately match them within the platform.
So the dealership guy article said, and this was a serious mic drop, dealers that rely too heavily on soft metrics risk misreading performance and overspending on campaigns that look busy but do not produce vehicles out the door. That's just absolutely devastating and true. How much of automotive ad spend is going to campaigns that look really, really busy but don't sell anything?
Yeah, I think more than a lot of us would care to admit. I think I can.
Do you have a range, like a percentage? Because if it's 30% even, we're talking about tens of billions of dollars lost.
Yeah, I think it's so. I start with it comes up many times, right? The famous quote that 50% of my advertising is wasted. I just don't know which half. I think that's the starting point. I think it's of the 50% that's not wasted. That means the macro strategy to me is right, and they're in the right channels or they're doing the right things. But of that 50%, I would say probably 50% of that is wasted, or could be better. Maybe is a nicer way to put it.
So your report is called Start with Your Destination. Destination is a sale. The argument looks as if you start with the outcome you want, which is obviously a car sold, and work backward, the media plan looks completely different than you start with reach and work forward. Explain the difference. What does a media plan look when you start with sales versus when you start with impressions?
Yeah, well, I think the greatest predictor of future behavior is past behavior, right? So you have that. Yes, there are new people who have never bought before that do buy, but the vast majority of people who are buying cars have bought at some point in the past, right? So if you use that as your foundational data, you are going to come up with very different profiles. And just like in the Honda example, we train the system on that outcome. It's the same principle. You're going to be building from a foundation of truth. If you start with, even if you think it's right, if you start with an assumption that's wrong, it's going to multiply, right? It's a little bit like there's an old movie from the 90s called Multiplicity with Michael Keaton, where he's able to make copies of himself, right, to make his life easier. But then the copies make copies of the copies, and it doesn't work very well in the end. So I think
it's like a bizarro Superman.
A little bit, yeah. So you get to a world where I think things are smaller from a reach standpoint. There was a previous episode of your show, I can't remember which one, but you hit on the right concept, which is advertisers will need to get used to the concept that sort of the normal CPM is much higher than they're used to, right? So right now they live in a world where, hey, I'm buying against reach, I'm buying against exposures, and my typical CPM is, I don't know, $4, right? In that kind of world, you're not going to need to reach all the people that you think you need to reach because you're trying to find those that look like buyers. And when you start with buyers and you work your way back to train your models and to train your strategy, you're going to be going after a smaller group, which means you have to pay more to get that group, but the impact is the same, right? So maybe your average CPM should be $15, but that shouldn't scare you because you're getting value.
So moving on, you wanted your superpower to be the ability to heal others, to take away someone else's pain. That is the most compassionate superpower I wish we've had on this show. Most people want to fly or see the future. You want to genuinely heal. Where does this compassion come from?
Yeah, caveat, obviously, I would love the ability to fly. That'd be awesome. Who doesn't want that? But it's not lost on me that I've been extremely fortunate in my life. I had, great parents dedicated to bringing me up. I didn't go wanting for anything, but I also recognize that that's not true of everyone. And I've fortunately have not had to experience too much of it firsthand, but I've seen pain from others in life. That'd be great too. I can't think of anything better than to take some of that away. When I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, one of the things I had the opportunity to do was intern at a local hospital because my dad was a doctor there. And one of my jobs was to collect data at the time. This was a while ago, but they were working on transitioning from film x-rays to digital scans. And I had to track data on, how fast and the difference in diagnosis quality and things like that. And I had to sit by some treatment machines to capture that data. And I, to this day, vividly remember he couldn't have been older than 6-year-old boy who was an in-house patient, and he had brain tumor, and he'd come in every day for scans and for x-rays, and his parents were obviously there, and he'd always do okay for a few minutes, and then he just couldn't do it anymore, and he would break down and they would break down. And it was just, I have so much respect for people that are able to do that as a profession. But I remember thinking, my God, that would break me if I had to do that every day. I know there are more people that you help than you don't, but
right.
If I had any ability to take any of that away from someone else or have them experience, like I think my life, I really love my life, and I want everyone else to feel some of that or have the ability to. And if I could pay that forward, I think it'd be awesome. Animals too, not just people.
So you also didn't have a Jedi. You created a Jedi council.
Yeah, I kind of cheated.
4 mentors, not one. Chip Peterson taught you the client perspective. Kara Osborne Gladwell taught you ad infrastructure. Scott Clark challenges you and worked together at 3 companies. And then your wife, Laura, who is in the industry also, taught you to translate data into a story. Mm-hmm. Which one do you call at midnight when something goes wrong? Well, obviously not your wife. She should be.
Well, she's already there.
Right there.
Yes. Well, right now, Scott is my other half at work. So he's my barometer for many things.
3 different companies he worked with you at, right?
Yeah.
What is that? What do you think that tells you either about you or him?
That's a great question. I think it tells me that one, he's very loyal, but also I feel like I'm a pretty good judge of talent. And
does his wife call you like your work husband or something?
He might. I'm not sure. He's definitely very strong on, and I think he'd be an interesting guest on the show at some point, because he's very strong on the technical side, and he's the brains behind the ID graph and whatnot. But in terms of the why and learning how things work, like he's just so meticulous on that front. And I was smart enough to know that, hey, wherever I go, like this guy's going to make me better. So I want to make sure I guess somewhat selfishly, but try to bring him with me, right? And it's worked out very well thus far. But yeah, I mean, my wife certainly is. She's in the industry, but on a very different side of it. So she runs marketing for Smith Group, which is an architecture firm, and is not really digital in any capacity, but is very graphically oriented in how do we promote the firm. But we're about to hit our 15-year anniversary, and we've been together, 17.
So you're into loyalty, I see. You've been at Urban Science for 10 years, when you just mentioned before on the show that most people 2 or 3 years. What keeps you there?
Challenge. I think, something that's very important for me in my career is I want to at least feel like what I'm doing has an impact. And I think this industry is a hard one to have an impact on. But I think the type of data that we have, the technology that we have, what we've been able to connect for clients, and we've talked about some of the results, is something to me that's outside of the machine that I mentioned earlier. Like there's a lot of work that's done around we have X dollars, how do we spend X dollars? How do we report on X dollars to the client? How do we rinse and do that again? Right. I think we have an opportunity and are living into it more and more to help make that better. I think, again, I think I mentioned when we were chatting at the beginning, I'm a big baseball guy, and a quote that I reference a lot from A League of Their Own, the great Tom Hanks and Jimmy Dugan is challenging Gina Davis, who is leaving at the onset of the World Series. And she says, it just got too hard. And he says, it's supposed to be hard. It's the hard that makes it great. If it was easy, everyone would do it. And I think that's very true. Like there's a lot of things that are really frustrating, change that I would like to happen faster that isn't, right? I mean, you asked, why isn't this adopted more widely? And I think it will be, but that's, you got to, change is hard. You got to stay the course.
So let's talk a little about tariffs in 2025 and 26. Automotive tariffs have disrupted pricing, inventory, consumer behavior. What is the tariff environment doing to automotive advertising? Are brands pulling back? Are dealers panicking?
Yeah, tariffs are interesting. It's very apropos. There was some talk even this morning about some additional tariffs that Trump is looking to push on the EU. I think the auto industry certainly reacts to economic factors. And I think the manufacturers are using it to pivot their product lines a little bit. So there's affordability is a big concern, making sure that there was a huge demand for EVs when there were credits. That's shifted a little bit to hybrids. There's always some sort of factor like that's impacting auto. But I think that, the consumer demand doesn't go away, it just changes, and it makes it harder for them to connect, which is why some of the things that we're talking about, I think, are so important.
What does the data show about EVs? Is it pulling back severely?
So there are fewer manufacturers that are offering them. Some have pulled out from true plugins altogether. And the consumer demand.
They're moving to the hybrids now, especially the trucks.
Yes. Yeah.
So the F-150 didn't do well, the Lightning.
Yes. Their numbers are certainly not what they wanted them to be. And not surprisingly, some of the brands who have a lot of hybrids in their portfolio are kind of leading the pack right now. And I think there are some others that are looking to catch up to that.
So what does the automotive advertising look like in 3 years? If Carl Matter gets everything he wants, what would it be?
Wow, that's a good question. I would like to see it done differently. We love buzzwords in our industry, and I'm sure there are others as well, but we throw around terms like optimization all the time. We throw around terms like data-driven all the time. An optimization by nature is really only an optimization if it makes something better. Otherwise, it's just a change. You don't know if it's better unless you're using the right data. So I would love to see an industry really put their money where their mouth is and truly be data-driven, right? Which is, okay, it might be different and that might be scary. And it comes from the top down. The clients have to be open to it too, right? Like, what does it really look like if I say, all right, I truly am going to let the data drive the results? I think one of the most impactful things that advertisers can do that is also amongst the most scary is testing and getting to incrementality and true lift to understand what's making an impact. Because the concept of, oh my gosh, I might have to take my media dollars and go dark on something, right? Or run a generic message. And that's terrifying for them to go back to their client and explain it. But to me, the results are so powerful when you do that. And I think honestly, even if you don't do that, like, you're probably not wasting more by going dark than you are just doing what you're doing, right? But you come out the other side with an impactful learning. So I think a truly data-driven industry that would be my utopia, because then, you can't argue with that. It is what the data is. So, we can all have opinions, but the data will set you free.
Rapid fire, whatever comes to your mind. Best car on the market right now?
Ooh, best car in the market. I'm pretty partial to the Chevy Traverse. We have one. That's
what I drive.
Very reliable family car.
It's just a little bit smaller than the Tahoe, but I can fit all the
I drive
kids
an
in
F-150, and that's great as well. But the Traverse is a little easier to park.
Worst automotive ad you've seen recently?
Worst automotive ad I've seen. There are. I didn't particularly love. I think there was a Stellantis ad with Eliza Schlesinger. I do like her quite a bit. I think the first one was good, but the second one, I think they tried to do some of the same things, and it wasn't quite as funny as the first one. But
right,
the public will tell them.
Most overrated metric in auto advertising?
Website visits.
Most underrated?
ROAS, cost per sale.
Steak or sushi?
Steak.
Bobby Flay, I assume.
Yes, I do love seafood, just not huge on sushi.
One sentence for every auto dealer who is still measuring website form fills.
One sentence for them. I'd wake up and smell the coffee.
Well, Carl, thank you. You came on the show and told us that the auto industry is spending billions measuring the wrong thing, that switching to outcome-based measurement can cut cost per sale by 2/3, that the execution layer is upside down with junior people making billion-dollar decisions, and that the data to fix it all already exists and it sits at Urban Science. Updated daily. I'm Pesach Latin. It's been the Adoda Show. Stop counting clicks, start counting cars, and see you next
Carl
time.
Matter,
Thank you.
Urban Science. Go optimize towards something that actually exists. Before you go, the people who keep the lights on around here. Troutman Amin LLP, back for a 4th year, which in podcast sponsorship terms is a common law marriage. These are the lawyers you call when the FCC, a class action firm, or your own compliance department has developed a sudden and unwelcome interest in your business. Eric Troutman and Pooja Amin have spent their careers standing between marketers and the consequences of their creativity. If you have ever sent a text message at scale and felt a small chill afterward, that chill has a phone number. TroutmanAmin.com, and incremental.com, who are, appropriately enough, sponsoring an episode about incrementality. I want to be clear that we did not plan that. The universe just occasionally hands you one. Incremental exists because someone finally got tired of watching attribution platforms take credit for sales that were going to happen anyway. They measure the lift, not the vibe. If your dashboard has never once told you something you didn't want to hear, your dashboard is not measuring. It is flattering you. Incremental.com. Disclosure, since we do this every week, our sponsors pay for ads. They do not pick guests, review scripts, or see episodes before you do. Neither Troutman, Amin, nor Incremental had any idea what Carl was going to say, and frankly, neither did I. I'm Pesach Latin. This has been the Adotat Show. Stop counting clicks. Start counting cars.
And we aren't done. Not even close. We're just getting started. Buckle up. Getting started. No intimidation whatsoever. We aren't scared. We are